the last video, we were discussing the Nicene Creed, the issue of the nature of Jesus and the Arian heresy. And so then let's move on to discussing about where we went from there. So after Constantine's death, his sons fought amongst themselves. Not an uncommon thing to happen in these situations. There were decades of power struggles. There was increased Germanic and Hunnic invasions, and it becomes difficult to fight wars on two fronts: Germanic tribes to the west, and then the Persians to the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire. And this is significant, the kind of wear and tear that's happening on the empire at this moment. Again, let's talk about the two fronts that they're really dealing with. Okay. So in the middle of all that, Christianity then takes a turn from being a very heavily sponsored religion, even at the being bemoaned by many conservative Romans from the old Roman pagan order. But Theodosius declares it the official religion in 380 CE. And he basically has a ban on paganism. Visits to their temples were forbidden. Remaining pagan holidays were abolished. Vestal virgins disbanded. Destruction of pagan temples, suppression, and the killing of the Serapis cult that came out of Egypt. And Manichaeanism, which is somewhat of a kind of Persian-influenced cult. And so he ends up being the last emperor to reunite under his authority the western and eastern halves of the empire. And he also ends up, having this crackdown on the non-Christian world. So this is now where we see the full turnover from where we were with Christianity as an oppressed minority religion initially, to now being, if we can be fair to say, the oppressor religion of the empire. That now, and if you look again, and I've mentioned this before about ISIS now, I hate to have to try to do the comparison, but as ISIS is destroying churches, taking them over, destroying pagan statues coming from ancient Mesopotamia, this fit very well in line with the way Christianity was doing things at this point. And it's going to go all the way this strain into Charlemagne, which we'll get to much later in the 9th century, where there is not just the suppression of other religions, but actually the destruction of their artifacts, literature, and ultimately people as well. Okay. I want to then move on from that to just kind of do a little discussion about some of the characters that are brought up in the book, but are going to play a pivotal role into the certain thought of Western civilization. One is Saint Augustine, who is basically a Roman African saint. Essentially, he was in what is now present-day Algeria. Probably a lot of you didn't know that. He was very influential to the development of Western Christianity and henceforth, Western thought. He developed the concept of the Catholic Church as the spiritual city of God. And this is really important because his idea of the church being made holy, even by the time later when we get to the King James Bible, Protestants and Puritans didn't like the word church being used in the translations of the Bible. They wanted it to be more like congregation, because they knew that the word church had the connotation of the actual church, the entity of the Catholic institutions. And so there was some debates and discussions over the use of that, and I believe King James wanted to keep the word in for his own political reasons. So the idea of the church not being the body of people, but the actual institution, then really kind of takes hold right here, and it's going to carry that connotation for a long time. In 386, he converts to Christianity, so he wasn't always a Christian. He was ordained a priest, and then from there he became a famous preacher, St. Augustine. But I want to actually return really quick back to his idea of the spiritual city of God, because as we were seeing how the Roman institutions were being used by the church, I think it's fair to say that while for Protestant Christianity, the Bible is the sole source of the Word of God, here we really see that he articulates the idea that God is with the church. And so if the Bible and the church seem to contradict each other, that is no more problematic than if the Old Testament and the New Testament seem to contradict each other. Ultimately, they're still Holy Scriptures. Ultimately, the church and the Bible and everything that's holy and God approved are all rolled into one, and those contradictions have to be resolved amongst the elites, not for the average person to kind of contest. And we're going to see that how that shapes things in the Western world, that concept and that difference between the discussion of who gets to think about or debate these issues. So anyhow, shortly before his death, Roman Africa was invaded by the Germanic Vandals, where we get the word vandalism from. And they were converted to Arianism. And so he experienced that. And so what we're really getting is splits within the Christian ideologies. We're getting the Germanic tribes coming in and being very influenced by Rome, but also coming in and disturbing Rome quite excessively here. So we're seeing all that. And so again, I just want you to keep all those things in mind. Now, I'm going to talk about some of these church councils that are not talked about in the text so much, mainly because I wanted to show that they help kind of solidify the empire in a certain way, but they also brought in some divisions that are still seen to this day. So the first council of Ephesus in 431, this was a dispute over the teachings of Nestorius, an archbishop of Constantinople. He made a rejection of the long-standing title Theotokos, Mother of God, for the Virgin Mary, and said that Jesus was fully human as a human. He was condemned as a heretic for this by them. Now, in modern times, the Assyrian Church of the East, which comes out of the historical Church of the East, revered him and still reveres him as a saint. And they don't necessarily consider themselves to be Nestorian, but they've been labeled with that. So the Assyrian community you see in the Central Valley, which were considered heretical by the church, was only essentially because of this really fine-tuned difference of what Nestorian, what he was saying. In other words, he's saying that Jesus was God but became fully man, and as a man, he didn't act as divine God. The Father was still in heaven, and so Mary, this idea of calling Mary the mother of God, would imply she gave birth to the God as an entity up in the heavens, but this avatar, this of Jesus in the flesh, that term couldn't apply, and that was a very important concept in Roman Catholicism. And so for this, he was banned as a heretic and oppressed by the church, and that is also going to later on be incorporated into some of the discussions that I want to have on the fragmentation of the Eastern Roman Empire, which will create ways for Islam, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So here's another important one. The Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE. So remember, as the textbook's talking about all these German invasions, the fall of Rome, the church is really all in the middle of all this, solidifying fundamental issues that are going to be seen important to church doctrine. So Emperor Marcian called for a church council to meet. There was again these debates. 500 bishops attend, the largest at that time, to really talk about the nature of Jesus again, because this topic reoccurs. And They, well, actually, what I want to do is I'm going to stop here and then I'm going to return back to this and we're going to really kind of break this down and talk about how it's significant in context to this chapter as well. Okay.